The Vietnam War. Its legacy is still ever present, despite happening some 40 plus years ago. However, if you look at the previous wars compared to the Vietnam War, you'll see something different. The combat. The Vietnam War had such a different style of, well, war, that it is very simple to see why people would be so interested in this war. The central question is, how did the combat of Vietnam help keep the war relevant to this day? Before diving into any of the deep specifics of the war, like the battles, it's important to set some baselines. First off, US troops and the US military in general were far more technologically advanced than the North Vietnamese. In fact, if you were to look at the technology that the US had compared to what the North Vietnamese had, it's actually pretty difficult to see why the North Vietnamese would be winning at all. However, I'll be getting into how North Vietnam fought this war as we get into the battles. Another important thing about this war is that this war is a battle of attrition. Now, you may be wondering what attrition means. And the dictionary definition of attrition is the action or process of gradually reducing the strength of effectiveness of someone or something through sustained attack or pressure. Now, what does this mean for the war? It means that unlike previous wars, there weren't any major points that one side had to capture in order to win the war. It was really more about wearing down the opponent until they gave up. Despite there being no major control points in the war for Vietnam that the US had to capture, the US did have in mind a specific trail that the North Vietnamese used a lot during the war. This trail is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was used by the North Vietnam to infiltrate troops and supplies into South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos during the Vietnam War. The trail was put into operation beginning in 1959. The network of trails and volume of traffic expanded significantly beginning in the 1960s, but it still took more than 1 month's march to travel from North to South Vietnam using it. By 1974, the trail was a well-marked series of jungle roads, some of them paved, and underground support facilities such as hospitals, fuel storage tanks, and weapons.
The failure to capture the Ho Chi Minh Trail by the US could be argued to be one of the major points as to why the US couldn't fully capture the North Vietnamese. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the battles. The US anticipated a large-scale attack on their base in Khe Sanh. However, this was just a diversion for the Tet Offense.
The US and South Vietnamese forces were focused on Khe Sanh, and North Vietnamese forces attacked over 100 South Vietnamese strongholds. This happened on January 30th, the Vietnamese New Year. The Tet Offensive was successful at first for the North Vietnamese, but after a series of bloody battles, the US forces were able to regain the ground lost to the Communists. The Tet Offensive was an enormous defeat for the North Vietnamese.
Despite the Tet Offensive being a massive military failure for the North Vietnamese, it was actually a great psychological victory for them. The Tet Offensive showed the US how terrible war really was due to news reporter Walter Cronkite, who showed truly how terrible war was to the public of the US. This led to anti-war protests, and is a common theme as we explore more battles of the war.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion.
The battle at Hamburger Hill was from May 10th to May 20th, 1969. It was a 10-day battle between US forces and North Vietnamese. It was part of Operation Apache Snow, and the objective was to clear the North Vietnamese from the A Shau Valley in Hue Province. The US forces suffered unnecessarily heavy casualties. The hill was abandoned on June 7th, which caused a public outrage.
Now would be a good time to stop and talk about the North Vietnamese tactics, because it played a large part in the 10-day stalemate at Hamburger Hill. First off, the North Vietnamese had an array of absolutely gruesome and destructive traps, punji sticks, aka bamboo sticks, which were sharpened and fire hardened, and easily went through boots and bone. There were also traps like grenades in cans, where a wire would be attached to a pull of a grenade, and after a person would walk by and pull the string, the grenade would go off, causing massive damage. Additionally, there were huge trapdoors invented that would flip entire troops onto punji sticks. Also, there were things called punji bear traps, where a troop would step in the middle and cause his foot to be clamped in the middle of a punji stick trap. Finally, it's important to talk about the many tunnels the North Vietnamese had. The North Vietnamese extensive knowledge of the jungles of Vietnam led to them creating many traps and similar things in tunnels that they were easily able to navigate through the use of symbols. These tunnels were essential to many surprise attacks on incoming US troops that were attacking. This is what led to such a gruesome stalemate at Hamburger Hill that was completely unnecessary in every sort of way. Since the North Vietnamese liked to hide it in the jungle so much, the US was using chemical-based warfare to draw them out. Things like napalm, a mixture of plastic polystyrene, hydrocarbon benzene, and gasoline, reached temperatures of up to 1,500 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit and practically burned down anything in 10 minutes. Additionally, the use of Agent Orange, which is a toxic chemical herbicide, was used to remove many trees in order to prevent the Vietnamese from using them. However, this had long-term effects on the Vietnamese, as even after the war, they still couldn't grow plants where Agent Orange was used.
The fall of Saigon started on April 30th, 1975. In this battle, North Vietnam had Saigon surrounded. U.S. troops and Vietnamese citizens were beginning to evacuate Saigon. So there were so many people evacuating that there was no space on the air carriers. This resulted in helicopters being left in the sea.
South Vietnamese Army pilots flew their families to safety aboard the carriers as well. But because there wasn't room to store their helicopters as well as those flown by American pilots, the Vietnamese were forced to ditch their aircraft at sea. The pilots were picked up by American Navy rescue boats.